The last harvest. The warning lights painted Earth's sky red for 3 straight days before anyone understood what they meant. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the orbital station, watching her home planet glow like a dying ember below. The collective's message had been clear: evacuate or die. They were coming to harvest Earth's resources, and humanity had 72 hours to leave. "We can't just abandon everything," her colleague Marcus said, his voice hollow with disbelief. Around them, the station buzzed with desperate activity as people scrambled to gather what little they could carry. Entire civilizations had fallen to the collective before. Their ships were already visible on the long-range scanners, a fleet so massive it blotted out distant stars. But Sarah wasn't watching the approaching armada. She was watching Earth, where 7 billion people were making an impossible choice. The evacuation ships could carry maybe 2 million if they packed them beyond safety limits. The rest would have to stay behind and face whatever the collective planned to do. "My daughter is down there," Sarah whispered. Emma was only 9 years old, safe in her grandmother's house in Colorado, probably scared out of her mind. The civilian evacuation lottery had already closed. Emma's name hadn't been selected. Neither had her grandmother's. The collective arrived exactly on schedule. Their harvest ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like mechanical locusts, each one the size of a small city. They landed in the oceans first, massive drills punching through the seafloor to tap the planet's core. Within hours, the water began to boil. Sarah watched it happen from space, helpless. The other stations were already departing, their evacuation complete. Her station would be the last to leave. They had maybe 6 hours before the atmospheric damage became irreversible, before Earth became uninhabitable forever. That's when the signal came. Not from Earth, but from somewhere deeper in space. A transmission in old binary code, the kind humanity hadn't used in decades. Sarah's fingers flew across her console, translating the message. Her breath caught in her throat as the words appeared on her screen. "They're not taking our home." The message came from the Titan mining colonies, from the settlements on Mars, from the research stations orbiting Jupiter. Every human outpost beyond Earth was transmitting the same thing. They were coming back. All of them. Not to evacuate, but to fight. "That's suicide," Marcus said, reading over her shoulder. "We've seen what the collective does to species that resist. They don't just harvest the planet, they erase every trace that the species ever existed. Every colony, every settlement, every ship. They'll hunt us across the galaxy until we're extinct." Sarah's hands were already moving, pulling up tactical displays, calculating trajectories. The mining ships from Titan were crude, built for hauling ice and minerals, not warfare. The Mars transports were even less impressive. But there were thousands of them, and they were all changing course, all heading back toward Earth. "They know what they're doing," Sarah said softly. "They know the cost." The first wave arrived within 8 hours. Mining ships retrofitted with makeshift weapons, their cargo holds packed with explosives and desperate volunteers. They didn't try to fight the collective's warships. They were too smart for that. Instead, they went straight for the harvest drills, ramming them at full speed, detonating their cargo in brilliant flashes that Sarah could see even from orbit. The collective responded exactly as predicted. Their warships broke off from the harvest operation and began pursuing the human vessels. That's when the second wave arrived, smaller craft from the asteroid belt, moving fast and erratic, drawing the collective's fire away from Earth. "They're buying time," Marcus breathed. "They're sacrificing themselves to shut down the harvest." Sarah watched a mining ship from Titan ram into a collective drill, the explosion bright enough to leave spots in her vision. She thought of the families who must have lived on that ship, the children who'd grown up mining ice under Saturn's rings, now dead in the cold vacuum of space. All to buy Earth a few more minutes. The third wave was the smallest but the strangest. Scientific vessels, research ships, things that had no business anywhere near a battlefield. They scattered across the solar system, transmitting constantly, flooding every frequency with data. Sarah couldn't understand it at first, couldn't grasp what they were trying to accomplish. Then she saw the collective ships hesitate. Their perfect, coordinated movements became jerky, uncertain. The warships began firing at random, sometimes at the human vessels, sometimes at each other. The harvest drills shut down one by one, their massive machinery grinding to a halt. "What's happening?" Marcus asked. Sarah pulled up the transmissions from the research vessels, her eyes widening as she understood. They cracked the collective's communication network. They're feeding them garbage data, thousands of contradictory commands every second. The collective is a hive mind, they can't function if they can't communicate. The battle lasted 3 more hours. By the end, the collective's fleet was in full retreat, their harvest incomplete, their losses catastrophic. Earth's ocean still boiled in places where the drills had penetrated, and the atmospheric damage would take decades to repair, but the planet was intact. Humanity had survived. Sarah's console chimed. A new message from Earth's surface. She opened it with shaking hands and saw Emma's face, her daughter smiling through tears, her grandmother's arms wrapped tight around her shoulders. "We made it, Mom," Emma said. "We're okay." Sarah pressed her hand against the screen, her own tears floating weightless in the zero gravity. Outside the viewport, the scattered remnants of humanity's cobbled-together fleet began the long journey home. They'd lost thousands of ships and tens of thousands of lives, but they'd proven something the collective had never seen before. Humanity didn't run. Not when it mattered. Not when home was on the line. The reckoning. 3 weeks after the battle, Sarah finally made it back to Earth. The descent through the damaged atmosphere was rough, the shuttle shaking hard enough to rattle her teeth. Through the viewport, she could see the scars the collective had left behind. Massive craters marked where their harvest drills had punched into the ocean floor. Steam rose in thick columns from the water, and entire coastal cities sat abandoned, flooded by the boiling seas. But Earth was alive. Against every odd, against all predictions, humanity's home had survived. Emma was waiting at the landing zone in Colorado, pressed against the security fence with her grandmother. The moment Sarah cleared quarantine, she ran to them, dropping to her knees to wrap her daughter in her arms. Emma smelled like soap and sunshine, so alive and real that Sarah couldn't stop the tears. "I knew you'd come back," Emma whispered against her shoulder. "I knew we'd all come back." The celebration didn't last long. 2 days after Sarah's return, the Emergency Council convened in what was left of Geneva. Representatives from every surviving nation and colony gathered in the damaged assembly hall. The mood was grim despite their victory. Humanity had won a battle, but everyone knew the war was far from over. Commander James Okonkwo from the Mars Defense Force stood at the podium, his weathered face displayed on screens throughout the hall. "The collective doesn't forget," he said bluntly. "We humiliated them. We cost them resources, ships, and time. They've harvested 1,000 worlds, and not one species has ever driven them back. They will return, and when they do, they'll bring everything they have." Sarah sat in the Earth delegation section, listening to the murmur of fear ripple through the crowd. She'd spent the last 48 hours reviewing the battle data, analyzing every move the collective had made. Something had been bothering her, a pattern she couldn't quite identify. "We need to run," someone called out from the lunar colony delegation. "Scatter across the galaxy. Make ourselves too difficult to hunt down. And leave Earth," another voice shot back. "Leave Mars and Titan. We just fought to save our home and you want to abandon it." The arguments erupted across the hall, nations and colonies that had united so perfectly during the battle now fracturing under the weight of fear. Sarah barely heard them. Her mind was racing, pieces of data clicking together in ways that made her hands go cold. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loud enough to draw attention. "They weren't trying to harvest us." The hall fell silent. Commander Okonkwo leaned forward. "Explain." Sarah pulled up her data on the main display, her fingers shaking slightly as she worked. Look at the drill placement. The collective always goes for maximum efficiency. They harvest core materials first, then atmosphere, then surface resources. But here they started with the oceans, the least valuable target. And their fleet positioning was wrong, too exposed, too vulnerable to the kind of attack we mounted. You're saying they wanted to lose? Marcus asked from beside her. No, Sarah said slowly. I'm saying they were testing us. They wanted to see what we'd do. How we'd fight. What our capabilities were. The implications hung heavy in the air. If Sarah was right, then humanity hadn't won anything. They'd simply shown the collective exactly what to expect when the real invasion came. Commander Okonkwo's jaw tightened. Then we prepare. We take every weapon we jury-rigged during the battle and we make them permanent. We turn every ship, every station, every settlement into a fortress. It won't be enough, said Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Jupiter Research Institute. She was young, barely 30, but she'd been part of the team that cracked the collective's communications. They adapt faster than we do. Whatever worked once won't work twice. We need something they can't predict. Something they've never seen before. Sarah thought of the mining ships from Titan, their crews knowing they were flying to their deaths. She thought of the research vessels that had sacrificed themselves to jam the collective's signals. She thought of humanity's greatest weakness, the thing that had nearly destroyed them 100 times throughout history. Their inability to work together. Their constant fighting, their divisions, their tribalism. But also their greatest strength. Their diversity. Their unpredictability. Their absolute refusal to give up. We don't fight them like an army, Sarah said quietly. The hall went silent again, everyone turning to listen. The collective is a hive mind. They think in unison, they move in perfect coordination. That's their strength and their weakness. They can't predict chaos because they don't understand it. You want us to fight without coordination? Someone asked skeptically. I want us to fight like humans, Sarah said. Every colony, every station, every ship fighting their own way. No central command they can target. No communication network they can crack. Just thousands of independent groups doing whatever they think will work. Some of it will fail. Some of it will be brilliant. They won't be able to predict any of it. The hall erupted in debate again, but Sarah could see understanding dawning in some eyes. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the most human strategy imaginable. Commander Okonkwo studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Controlled chaos. Hit them from every angle with tactics they've never encountered. Make them fight 1,000 different wars at once. Over the next weeks, the plan took shape. The Titan colonies began converting their ice haulers into ram ships, each one different, each one designed by a different engineering team. Mars started building automated drones with AI programmed to be deliberately irrational, to make decisions that no logical mind could predict. The asteroid belt colonies created mines that didn't just explode but split into smaller mines, or turned into decoys, or broadcast fake signals. Earth focused on the one thing the collective couldn't harvest: culture. Artists and musicians, writers and performers began creating messages, stories, songs that would be broadcast into space. Not as weapons, but as proof. Proof that humanity was more than resources to be taken. Proof that some things couldn't be measured in metals and minerals. Sarah worked 20-hour days, coordinating with teams across the solar system while trying to spend every spare moment with Emma. Her daughter had grown quieter since the battle, more serious. She spent hours drawing pictures of the mining ships, memorials to the people who'd saved her world. Do you think they'll come back? Emma asked one night, her pencil moving across the paper. Sarah wanted to lie, to tell her daughter that everything would be fine. But Emma deserved the truth. Yes, she said. They'll come back. Emma nodded, not looking up from her drawing. Then we'll fight them again. Right? Right, Sarah said, pulling her daughter close. And we'll keep fighting, as many times as it takes. Because that's what humans do. Outside their window, the night sky glowed with the lights of orbital construction. Humanity was preparing for war, not as one united force, but as thousands of independent, stubborn, creative groups who all agreed on only one thing. They weren't giving up their home. Not today. Not ever. The human solution. The collective returned 6 months later with a fleet 3 times larger than before. Their ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, a wall of metal and energy that stretched across the darkness like a closing fist. This time, there would be no warnings, no countdown, no chance to evacuate. They'd come to erase humanity completely. Sarah watched them approach from the observation deck of Orbital Station 7, now retrofitted into what the engineers jokingly called a flying junkyard. Emma stood beside her, wearing a child-sized pressure suit that made her look impossibly small. Sarah had tried to send her to the bunkers on Luna, but Emma had refused. "We stay together," her daughter had said with a stubbornness that reminded Sarah of herself. "No matter what. All stations, this is Commander Okonkwo," the voice crackled through every speaker in the solar system. "They're here. Remember the plan. Remember who we are. And remember, we don't fight like them. We fight like us." There was no coordinated response, no unified battle cry. Instead, chaos erupted across the system as thousands of independent groups launched their attacks exactly as they'd planned. Or more accurately, exactly as they hadn't planned. The Titan ice haulers went first, but not in formation. Some accelerated straight at the collective fleet. Others veered wildly off course, spinning and tumbling like debris. Still others appeared to flee in the opposite direction. The collective's targeting systems couldn't predict which movements were intentional and which were malfunctions. Their first volley of fire wasted itself on empty space and decoys. Then the real chaos began. The Mars drones arrived, thousands of them, each one programmed with deliberately irrational AI. They attacked in patterns that made no tactical sense, spiraling when they should have charged, retreating when they had advantages, grouping together randomly then scattering without reason. The collective's hive mind struggled to model behavior that had no logic behind it. Sarah's station launched its contribution, modified cargo containers filled with construction debris, old satellites, and broken equipment. Junk, basically. But junk moving at high velocity, spreading in unpredictable clouds that interfered with sensors and forced the collective ships to constantly adjust their positions. "It's working," Marcus shouted from his console. "Their formation's breaking down. They're trying to fight a coordinated battle against an enemy that isn't coordinating." But Sarah knew it wouldn't be enough. The collective was adapting, learning. Their ships began ignoring the irrational attacks, focusing instead on the stations and planets that couldn't move, couldn't dodge. A harvest ship broke through the chaos and made straight for Earth, its massive drill already extending. That's when the broadcast started. Every speaker, every radio, every communication device in the solar system suddenly erupted with sound. Music. Human music, from every culture, every era, every style. Classical symphonies overlapped with rock guitars and tribal drums and electronic beats. It was noise, beautiful and terrible and utterly chaotic. And woven through it all, voices. Humans speaking, singing, laughing, crying. Telling stories. Sharing memories. Arguing and joking and pleading. 7 billion voices, all different, all unique, all broadcasting at once on every frequency the collective used for communication. The harvest ship heading for Earth slowed, its trajectory becoming uncertain. Across the battlefield, collective ships began firing randomly, their perfect coordination shattered by the flood of incomprehensible data. They'd cracked human communication during the first battle, learned to predict it, but this wasn't communication. This was culture, raw and unfiltered, and it didn't follow any rules they could understand. Sarah watched a collective warship fire on 3 of its own vessels, its systems overwhelmed trying to filter the chaos. Another ship simply stopped moving entirely, hanging dead in space as if its crew had given up trying to process what was happening. "They can't fight us," Dr. Tanaka's voice came through Sarah's earpiece, filled with amazement. "They're a hive mind. They think together, act together. But we're 7 billion individual minds, and we're all attacking them at once with everything that makes us human. They literally can't process it." Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve, pointing at her display. "Mom, look." The collective fleet was retreating. Not in formation, but in scattered groups, some ships moving faster than others, their perfect unity broken. They'd never encountered a species like humanity before, a species that won not through superior technology or coordination, but through pure, creative chaos. As the last collective ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, a new signal came through the noise. This one was different, structured and clear. It took Sarah a moment to realize it was the collective attempting to communicate. The message was simple: classification update. Species, human. Status, unsuitable for harvest. Reason, unpredictable. Avoid. Cheers erupted across every human station and settlement. People who'd been certain they were about to die suddenly found themselves victorious. The impossible had happened. Humanity had faced extinction twice and survived both times. But Sarah didn't cheer. She pulled up the long-range sensors, tracking the collective's retreat path. They weren't just leaving the solar system. They were leaving this entire region of the galaxy, putting distance between themselves and the species that had broken their hive mind with nothing but noise and creativity and stubborn chaos. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "We actually did it. We're safe. For now," Sarah said quietly. She thought about the message the collective had sent. Unsuitable for harvest. They hadn't beaten the collective in battle. They'd simply confused them so badly that harvesting humanity seemed like more trouble than it was worth. It was the most human victory imaginable. They hadn't won through strength or intelligence or superior technology. They'd won by being so chaotic, so unpredictable, so impossibly diverse that the collective's perfect hive mind couldn't cope with them. Emma squeezed her hand. "What happens now?" Sarah looked around the observation deck, at the crew celebrating, at the Earth spinning peacefully below, at the scattered debris of the battle drifting through space. Humanity had fought off the greatest threat they'd ever faced, not by becoming something they weren't, but by being exactly what they'd always been. Messy. Divided. Argumentative. Creative. Stubborn. Unpredictable. Human. "Now we rebuild," Sarah said, lifting Emma into her arms. "We fix what's broken, we remember what we lost, and we keep being exactly what saved us. We keep being human." The celebrations continued for days. Memorials were planned for the thousands who died in both battles. The damaged ecosystems on Earth would take generations to heal. Humanity had scars now, deep ones, that would never fully fade. But they were alive. Their home was safe. And somewhere out in the galaxy, the collective was marking human space as territory to avoid. Not because humanity was the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. But because some species were simply too chaotic to harvest. Too unpredictable to control. Too human to understand. And that was exactly how humanity liked it. Sarah stood at the viewport long after the others had left, watching the stars, Emma asleep against her shoulder. The universe was vast and dangerous, filled with threats they couldn't imagine. But humanity had proven something important: they didn't need to be perfect. They didn't need to be united in every way. They just needed to be themselves. Chaotic, creative, stubborn, impossible humans who refused to give up their home. "Sleep well, sweetheart," Sarah whispered to her daughter. "You're safe now. We all are." Outside, Earth turned slowly in the darkness, scarred but unbroken, home to a species that had just taught the galaxy an important lesson. Never underestimate the power of organized chaos. Never bet against humans fighting for home. And never, ever try to predict what humanity will do next. Because even humans don't know that answer.